Solid tales, history uncovered. 12,000 bicycles. That's the secret weapon that let 70,000 Japanese troops crush a garrison twice their size, in what Winston Churchill would later call the worst disaster and largest capitulation in British military history. In less than 2 months, an empire's decades-long grip on the Malay Peninsula was wiped out. The world expected a brutal fight between tanks, battleships, and massive armies. No one imagined the war would be won on 2 wheels, cutting through the dense jungles of Southeast Asia. On December 8, 1941, roughly 90 minutes before the first bombs even fell on Pearl Harbor, Japanese assault forces stormed the beaches of Kota Baru in northern Malaya, perfectly synchronized with landings in Thailand. This wasn't a follow-up attack, it was a highly coordinated opening strike of the Pacific War. Have you ever heard of a massive military victory won with bicycles instead of tanks? Drop a yes in the comments if this is your first time hearing this story, and let us know what you think so far. The British High Command had slept behind a wall of arrogance. They were convinced that the suffocating foliage of the Malay Peninsula was a natural, impenetrable barrier, but the Japanese Imperial Army didn't fight the jungle, they rode through it. Their motorized infantry was spearheaded by the Silver Wheel units. These modified bicycles allowed troops to seamlessly pivot from bombed-out highways to narrow, mud-slicked plantation trails. Instead of marching to exhaustion, every individual soldier carried a staggering 34 kilograms, 75 pounds of gear, rations, and ammunition strapped to his frame. The true weapon, however, was psychological terror. Bicycles moved in near absolute silence. Time and again, Japanese veterans slipped through the dense foliage, executing silent, sweeping flank maneuvers. To the undertrained Commonwealth and colonial conscripts, most of whom had zero frontline combat experience, the enemy felt like a ghost. Hearing the sudden crack of rifles from their rear, British commanders would succumb to the paralyzing illusion of being entirely encircled. Out of sheer terror, massive British columns retreated before putting up a real fight, abandoning mountains of modern weapons and vital supplies. The Gibraltar line in Kedah was a defensive bulwark the British confidently estimated would stall the Japanese for 3 months. Instead, its core defensive positions were shattered in just 3 to 4 agonizing hours, and the entire line collapsed within 2 days. But the worst was still to come, because Britain was about to lose its most powerful weapon in the Pacific, and with it, any hope of stopping the Japanese advance. To understand why Japan risked waking the sleeping giants of the West, we must look to the suffocating economic noose tightening around Tokyo's neck. Back in 1937, Japan launched a full-scale invasion of China. This move didn't just break international law and the Nine-Power Treaty. It gutted Western commercial interests and tore apart America's long-standing open-door policy. As Western media broadcasted the well-documented horrific atrocities of the Nanjing Massacre, international moral condemnation crystallized into action. In 1939, Washington initiated a moral embargo that starved Japan of critical aircraft components and oil. Desperate for petroleum, rubber, and tin, Tokyo turned its hungry gaze toward the European colonies of Southeast Asia. When Japanese troops occupied southern French Indochina in July 1941, the United States retaliated with a devastating blow, freezing all Japanese assets and imposing a total, unyielding oil embargo. They were joined by the ABCD line, a formidable economic blockade formed by America, Britain, China, and the Dutch East Indies. Facing economic collapse, Japan chose war. To secure the massive resource reserves of Southeast Asia, they had to shatter the American fleet at Pearl Harbor and simultaneously execute a southern offensive to neutralize British interference in Malaya. Britain's survival instinct, however, was entirely consumed by the raging fires in Europe. The Royal Air Force's bleeding-edged fighter planes and heavy tanks were being fed into the meat grinder of North Africa. Instead of land forces, London offered an empty naval threat. Force Z. The fleet was supposed to be shielded from the sky by the aircraft carrier HMS Indomitable, but the carrier had run aground in the Caribbean months earlier. Force Zid sailed into the South China Sea completely naked. On December 8th, Singapore suffered its first Japanese air raids. 2 days later, on December 10th, Japanese naval aviation squadrons hunted down Force Zid off Malaya's east coast. With no air cover to shield them, the battleship HMS Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser HMS Repulse were torn apart by torpedoes and bombs, sinking to the bottom of the ocean that same day. The British now had no air cover, no naval shield, and a defensive plan that was falling apart before the fight even began. But they had no idea just how badly the Japanese had already infiltrated their stronghold. While Britain looked the other way, Japanese intelligence was meticulously mapping their demise. Long before the first shot was fired, a vast network of spies had infiltrated Malaya. Disguised as humble merchants and wide-eyed tourists, they documented every pillbox and mapped every trail. They even quietly funded anti-colonial resistance groups to sow chaos behind enemy lines, not as liberators, but as conquerors preparing the ground. By the time the invasion launched, the Japanese command possessed a godlike view of the battlefield. As early as November 1940, British intelligence finally detected massive Japanese troop concentrations. Panic birthed a preemptive strike plan dubbed Operation Matador. But British hesitation was fatal. Before Operation Matador could ever be launched, Japanese forces struck. They were led by Lieutenant General Tomoyuki Yamashita, a ruthless, seasoned commander who would soon earn the terrifying moniker, the Tiger of Malaya. Backed by the brilliantly aggressive tactical planning of his chief of staff, Masanobu Tsuji, their strategy was breathtakingly simple, pure, relentless speed. As the Malayan campaign of 1941 to 1942 unfolded, Japanese forces pushed south, carving through the peninsula and tearing the British formations to shreds, all while suffering fewer than 10,000 casualties. If you're enjoying this deep dive into one of World War II's most shocking upsets, hit the like button right now. It helps more history fans find this video, and we really appreciate it. By January 27, 1942, the agonizing retreat reached its terminal point. The shattered remnants of the British Army withdrew across the causeway onto the island of Singapore. Despite the staggering losses, an immense garrison was now packed into the fortress known as the Gibraltar of the East. In theory, it was an impregnable citadel where they could bleed the Japanese dry and wait for salvation. But salvation was a ghost. Just 2 weeks later, Yamashita's forces stormed the island, starved of air cover, their naval support sitting at the bottom of the sea, and their morale pulverized by the relentless Japanese tempo. The defense simply disintegrated. On February 15th, the remaining garrison of roughly 130,000 troops, a fractured, exhausted coalition of British, Australian, Indian, and local Malayan forces, surrendered to an enemy half their size. The fall of Singapore was a masterclass in mobility, precision intelligence, and psychological warfare overriding sheer mass. This campaign didn't just change the course of the Pacific War, it shattered the myth of Western colonial invincibility and rewrote the future of Southeast Asia forever. If you want to learn more about the untold, hardcore stories of World War II, click the video on your screen right now to see our previous deep dive. And let us know in the comments, what historical battle should we uncover next? Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out. History Uncovered. Subscribe to Solid Tales.